Dakin O'Roark is doing an analysis of Silicon Valley Bank, and Dakin is advised and mentored by Dr. Jane Shio.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming here. It's a real pleasure to get to present something I've worked on for a year, and I hope you all enjoy. So I'll just open off with a quick question. How many of you are aware that Silicon Valley Bank is a thing and that it collapsed? Okay, yeah, that's good. It was big news a year ago. So my research was into analyzing why it happened and what we can learn from it in the future. What are the policy implications, and just in general, what can we learn? So my interest was drawn to this personal, but not too personal. So in my intermediate finance class with Dr. G last year, in the spring, when the class happened, we had an assignment that was to do an investment portfolio. And so it was all fake money through the Bloomberg terminal, but I was looking at stocks, and one of the stocks I ended up picking was Silicon Valley Bank. So in January, thankfully, it wasn't graded based on performance, so I got off lucky there. But just the idea of something that seems so good on paper at first glance, going bad so quickly, that just sort of stuck with me, and that's what caused me to want to present about this topic. So first, in the agenda, we're just going to give a little bit of background information on the company and some of the banking theory that goes into bank runs and how they operate. And then I'll go over a timeline of events and give my analysis, why it happened, and then what we can learn from it and some of the impacts that it had as well. So first of all, just a little bit of background information. Silicon Valley Bank was founded in 1983. It is very, very heavily invested in the startup venture capital tech scene. So it's right there in the name, Silicon Valley. When you're looking at venture capital companies, there's probably not one that wasn't somehow involved with this. It was one of the largest regional banks at the time, right before its collapse, with over $209 billion in assets. And after its collapse, it was the second biggest bank collapse after 2008. So this was a very important deal, to say the least. The firm survived the dot-com bubble, but it did not survive 2023. So, to understand some of the dynamics at play here, it's important to understand how a bank works. Obviously, we as depositors give the money to the bank collects the money in a pool, and then it loans it out to businesses as an investment to spur economic growth. And this is a very key component of the economy. Without it, it would be much harder to get a start on businesses, to get a start on owning a house. So if you look at things like mortgages, small business loans, none of that would be possible without banking. One of the key models in the study of banking is the Diamond-Dybvig model of banking. So one of the inherent risks when it comes to owning a bank is the fact that you have long-term investments that need to play out over a period of time, but at the same time, your depositors can come request their money on a short-term basis. So this risk is inherent to all banking, but the solution that they found was in the fact that there can be deposit insurance. So the FDIC is very, very important when it comes to looking at the stability of our system, and that will play a much bigger role later when I start explaining. So just as a brief overview of the last 5 years of the company, using their stock market performance as a general indicator of the health of the company. While it isn't perfect in any regards, I find it to be a very simple and easy way to understand company performance. So of course we have COVID times, there's a dip, but then with the financial stimulus given out by the government and the lowering of interest rates, there was sustained growth all throughout the back half of 2020 you look at this period, this was a big period of growth for tech companies in general, for the stock market in general as well. But come 2022, things were coming back down to reality. Basically, the fun times were over and the Fed was hiking interest rates, which just means it costs more to borrow money and grow. And then all seems well, it comes back down to pre-COVID levels, which is something that we see in a lot of companies at the time, so there's nothing that really points out a big issue. Of course, that's ignoring the elephant in the room, the line going straight down to zero, which happened over the course of 48 hours, which I will now talk about. So when you look at the week of March 5th, all is well until the end. March 8th, Silicon Valley Bank, they send out a letter to their investors and they say, we are selling all of our assets available to sale at a loss, and we are looking for investment in order to help us out of this situation. So this sort of came as a big surprise. It took a lot of people off guard, and people got talking, and come the next morning, you have this year that is a 60% drop in one day alone. Also at that time, you see a knock-on effect with other smaller regional banks, like Signature and First Republic Bank. There's a lot of panic in the market. Nobody knows what's going to happen. As we move into Friday, the FDIC steps in and they say, okay, we're stopping everything now, no more withdrawals. We're going to guarantee all deposits up to $250K. The bank is collapsed. So going into the weekend, that's where things stood. Thankfully, and I'll talk about this later, this didn't happen in the middle of the week, so there was this weekend period where people were able to come out and calm down the market, so there wasn't a sustained period of loss for banks in general. But you see this recovery period over the next couple of months, and that happens because the FDIC came out and said, okay, $250K is too low, we're going to up it to all deposits. And so when we look at the collapse, we know what happened, now it's time to understand why. The first reason why is, of course, the financial and interest rate risk. So when you look at the federal funds rate, which is basically the base amount of interest that a bank can lend at, you see that during COVID, it was at basically zero, and then we see this massive rise over the period of 1 year. Now, the company during that period took out lots of long-term loans, long-term bonds. So they invested heavily in treasury bonds, which are supposed to be a very safe investment. It's not a lot of return, but there's basically no risk because the federal government can always pay its debts because it prints its own money. So it seemed like a wise investment at the time, but the problem is that this sharp increase right here was basically unprecedented. If you go back and look through the history here, following the Great Recession, you see it took over a period of 2 years to get up to just 2.5%. So I assume what happens, and a lot of companies did this, is they took out these bonds not realizing that inflation would become such a problem and that the Fed would have to raise rates so quickly. And this led to a severe impact on the value of bonds, because as new bonds were being given out at these higher interest rates, the value of the bonds that they had bought down here was dramatic. They had lost a lot of value on that. And so they had these basically black holes sitting on their books. These are paper losses, of course, until they sold on March 8th. But as you can see, this wasn't just the case for Silicon Valley Bank. There, you can see I have this mystery bank here, and they have the same issue. And this bank is actually Goldman Sachs. So this is not just something that, the Silicon Valley, they made some stupid move. This was a move that was done across all regional banks. So if that's the case, then if a lot of other banks are doing this as well, then why did Silicon Valley Bank collapse? And I think that comes down to reason number 2 was a lack of diversification. As I talked about earlier, Silicon Valley Bank was heavily involved in the tech sector. So the tech sector is heavily dependent on a easy influx of cash to get them started off the ground, and that way they have this base of money they can rely on while they get their monetization up and running. So they need a lot of low interest cash in order to support themselves. And we see this in big companies as well as smaller startups. So, for example, I'm sure everybody's heard about the tech layoffs that have been happening this year and last year. So this is a response to the same interest rate risk that I was just talking about earlier. They just need to cut budgets back a little bit. They grew a little bit too fast for the thing. Over 2,000 startups have actually shut down over the course of 2023. So when you look at that from the bank's perspective, these are investments that just aren't playing out. As you can see, the whole NASDAQ, which is a tech indices, it was a big decline down through 2022 as people started to price in this risk in their valuations of these companies. And then there's one more thing about tech issues, and this comes to my third reason, is that they love to post on social media. So reason number 3 is the psychology of the bank run and then just the general environment, people talking to one another, people sharing information. This was the first bank run in the social media era. So back in 2008, of course, social media existed, but not at the scale as it is now. Everybody and their mom is on Facebook, Twitter, I guess X now, but there's a lot of room for just doom and gloom because that's what gets eyes on things. And so there was this interesting study that touched on the same issue, and that was that when you are in an environment of fear, even before you talk about the risk of a bank run, this study, what they did was they had 4 groups of people. They had one group right at a time when you were afraid, right at a time when you were happy, sad, angry. And you write down those feelings that get you in that headspace. And then they said, okay, we're going to run you through a prisoner's dilemma, basically, where it says, do you want to go to the bank and pull out your money, or do you want to keep your money in the bank? And compared to the other 3, the environment of fear, without any changes to reporting or anything like that, is what actually influenced people to more heavily pull their money out. So, but on the other hand, you also have this sort of marketplace of ideas where you can have, more reputable voices, I would say, share their takes, although sometimes this always makes me laugh. This is a multi-millionaire. He's invested in, his name is Jason Calcanis. He's heavily involved in the startup community, and no matter how much money you have, I guess you can't stop yourself from all caps posting on Twitter when it comes to something like this. So there's a feedback when it came to not wanting this to turn into another 2008. And a lot of people were worried about that. And thankfully it didn't. And I'll talk about that more on the next slide. But one of the reasons it didn't was for the FDIC to come out and say we're going to guarantee all deposits. So when you look at something like that, that sort of reminds me of 2008, looking at something too big to fail, the bailouts that happened during then. The FDIC covering of all deposits, thankfully it was done by banks, so that's not money coming out of mine or yours pockets going to Uncle Sam. But yeah, from that would be the 3 reasons why the bank failed. So what can we learn from this? Because that's what's important at the end of the day. We don't want this to happen again. So I would say the first thing we learned is that no matter how many regulations you have in place, there's always going to be some inherent risk when it comes to the market. You can have people checking it, right, left, or center, up and down, but at the end of the day, when you're doing business, there's going to be things you just can't predict. And this was one of them. I think that, when you look at people in their position, they're human beings trying to make the best decisions with the information you have. I'm looking back on this with hindsight. I can say, oh, you should have been looking at X, Y, Z. But when you're in the moment, when you're looking at the information you have, you can only do what that information tells you. Another thing is the importance of controlling the general sentiment when it comes to economic uncertainty. So going into 2022 with the Fed raising rates, there was a lot of worry that the economy in total was just going to crash. People were saying, oh, in 3 months, we'll never survive this. We're going to have stagflation. It's going to be the 70s all over again. Thankfully, it wasn't. But I feel like that general environment of people saying that things will go bad things will happen, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you see one sign of danger, and you look at this, you come out and you say that that's the way things are going to be. Anything else? I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening to the presentation. I really appreciate it. So.
You mentioned like the mystery thing being like the Goldman Sachs thing, so why, like what's the difference? Like is it the only thing that you found was differentiating the ETFs, or is there something else?
Yeah, so the customer base, and I'll also just say size, because it's such a big bank, they can afford to eat a loss here and there. But I do really think that when you're looking at diversification, you should always be going for that, because it just reduces risk so much. You can look at that from a portfolio setting as well. So,
Dakin, 2 slides at the end. Yeah. Had a comment. I'm sorry, go towards the end again. I'm sorry, one slide at the end. The bank is reopened after just being closed.
Oh, no, completely forgot that. Yeah, so the stockholders were wiped out. So that's the people who really ate the loss at the end of the day. But their assets, their investments that they have with venture capital firms, they were actually purchased by First Citizens Bank like 2 weeks afterwards at a discount, and the federal government helped them out, of course. But yes, the deposits and the loans they're going to work.
So your current bank is known as First Citizens Bank, then they did rename themselves back to Silicon Valley Bank?
They're still operating under the name, but they're a subsidiary. They're under the portfolio. And then I mentioned 2 other banks. One of them was bought by, I think, Chase, and another one was bought by Regions. So, yes.
I'd like to say congratulations and great job on the presentation.
Thank you,
I
sir.
had a question. So let's say that you were on Silicon Valley's financial risk management team.
Yeah.
What would be like something that you would look forward to in a team that never was happening prior to this? Or what was something that you would say was most impactful?
So, I guess if I was from the inside looking out, I'm sure a lot's going to come out in the coming years. People on the inside giving, their opinion on what happened. But I would just say to look at the end of the day, it comes down to the fundamentals. So when you see, even if this is a paper loss, at the end of the day, you're going to have to sell it at some point. You can't hold on to it forever. This is almost 1.5 times their net income for that year. So you look at that. You see, probably what's funny is this came out February 24th, 2023. They released their 10K to the public. But then you look at the stock here, and it's like oh, everything's fine. It's not until they actually sold that people realize something bad was going on. So.
When you were doing the simulation for the project and you chose Silicon Valley Bank, was there a part of you that felt like you cursed it a little bit?
No. No, it's, I actually found it rather funny in a, not funny, but, just like, oh, that's just my luck sort of thing. But no, it was, again, there's relative valuation. I went through a couple of different screens on the Bloomberg terminal, looked at investor recommendations. I mean, you look back, February was rated top 20 banks in America. So it's, things go from good to bad very quickly. And I do think that social media is really a key part of that, because the largest bank collapse in history actually took 9 months. In 2008, it was a very slow, drawn-out process. Of course, that's to do with the fact that they were dealing with mortgages, so there was, more leniency when it came to that. They actually had to default. But still, I do think that in this information age, the ability to just log onto a computer and type in, call someone, I want all my money out now. So that's definitely a risk we have to look forward to. And one last thing, and I'll get to you too. Sorry, I forgot to say this, but this is a risk we're still dealing with now. There's been news about one other one I have the name written down here somewhere, but their stock is going up and down. People don't know if it'll get bought out by somebody else. So it's an ongoing issue that the economy's dealing with.
I'm not sure how technology has impacted what banking is. We kind of got earlier where you asked how, you have instant information. Do you think the federal banks all get it now kind of just makes more of this compared to back then where it was more hearing from the newspaper first?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's it's a double-edged sword. There's more opportunities to make money. Of course, there's trading algorithms and Bloomberg terminal. I mean, it's linked by milliseconds if you go to one of their offices in New York to the trading floors. Everything's done online now. But yeah, it's technology definitely a double-edged sword. So. Thank you, everybody.
It's my great pleasure to be the virtual president, one of my best students in finance. And here is my offer. If you will stay here next semester, I want to invite you to one of my finance classes.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so this topic, yes. And this topic is very important because it shows us the financial health of the economy depends on financial health of the banks. And it is very difficult to predict bank failures. And the prevention is the key. And congratulations.